Who's your commander?
Good luck.
Equip.
Move to combat.
Resolves.
Now, before you attack
Does
me,
anyone have an answer?
well played.
Good game.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Jumbo Commander YouTube channel. My name is DJ, and we're going to be looking at some of the Brawl commanders out of the Throne of Eldraine set that's coming up shortly. I have been super impressed by them, and one that might have been overlooked but is truly amazing is Korvold Fae-Cursed King. Korvold, Fae-Cursed King, is 2 black, red, green for a 4/4 legendary dragon noble. Korvold has flying, and whenever Korvold Fae-Cursed King enters the battlefield or attacks, sacrifice another permanent. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Korvold and draw a card. So I think when people read Korvold, they're a little bit intimidated because it has you sacrificing your own permanents. Not the best when you want to get value. It even has you sacrificing things when Korvold attacks. But this sacrifice gives us a huge benefit that we will gladly pay. Drawing a card? That's amazing. We will take that in a heartbeat. And growing Korvold bigger means that Korvold is more than just a card generation threat. It's a threat that can kill someone out of nowhere in the air. This whole deck can be built around sacrifice outlets. We can have tons of things that sacrifice, and then we're just drawing cards over and over and over again. So in this deck, we're going to want to have lots of spare permanents lying around, good things to sacrifice, ways to just keep generating value over and over again. I also love that Korvold can get huge if we can find a critical mass of things to sacrifice. If we're imagining a deck with lots of permanents in it, we might want to go wide, put lots of little tokens on the battlefield so we can always sacrifice them. But then also, we have the ability to go tall. As we sacrifice all those creatures, Korvold gets huge himself, and that makes for really robust threats. People that can deal with a single creature might not be able to deal with a mass of them, and vice versa. So the first thing I want to do is go through the basic components of a commander deck. The mana ramp, the card draw, the removal, the threats, and at every single turn, we're going to see the word sacrifice over and over and over again. And every time you see that, I want you to imagine your commander growing bigger. I want you to imagine drawing cards. I want you to imagine the synergy because it is there at every turn. The mana base in this deck could be insane. Fetch lands like Prismatic Vista or the traditional fetches can draw us a card along with fixing. Blighted Woodland can ramp us a little bit while drawing a card. Nurturing Peatland can ramp us when we need to and then draw 2 cards by sacrificing. Let's not mention Lotus Field, which can draw us a ton of cards sacrificing all of those lands. And even the traditional ramp spells, like Spring Bloom Druid could draw us a card as it ramps. Same thing with Harrow and Secura Tribe Elder. All of these cause us to sacrifice a permanent while we're ramping, which gives us +1/+1 counters and card draw. We can keep going by fixing into some amazing lands that are in this deck with crop rotation. And Primal Growth is a fine ramp spell on its own, but if we happen to have a creature, then it turns into this amazing spell. We can go a little bit deeper into this strategy with a card like the Gitrog Monster. Could you imagine sacrificing a land at the beginning of your turn and drawing 2 cards? Every single fetch land we have, generating a ton of value. We can also keep our commander safe with Sylvan Safekeeper. You can see that with all of these sacrifice effects in the deck, we are going to want to pay close attention to keeping our commander on the board. I also really like Artifact Ramp that's out there, Commander Sphere, Burnished Heart, Wayfarer's Bauble, because these can come down early, and if we don't immediately need the ramp, we can wait until our commander's on the battlefield and then draw the card off Commander Sphere, ramp a little bit more with Burnished Heart, and sacrifice that Wayfarer's Bauble. That means that we can have these big turns where we land our commander and suddenly sacrifice a bunch of stuff, draw a ton of cards, and grow our commander huge. This works particularly well with treasures. Ruthless Knave, Dockside Extortionist, and Pitiless Plunderer. All of these can put treasures onto the battlefield which can just sit around, and they can lead to these big turns. Can you just imagine if your commander hits the battlefield and suddenly you sacrifice 3 or 4 treasures, draw 4 cards, your commander becomes huge, and now you have mana to use with those card draw? I mean, it's so good, the explosiveness. Ruthless Knave also has a sacrifice outlet built into it. Pitiless Plunderer also synergizes really well. As we sacrifice a bunch of creatures, it's going to create those treasures as well, doubling up on the possibilities for sacrifice. You know, Pitiless Plunderer has me thinking of cards like Sifter of Skulls and Pawn of Ulamog, because they also kind of turn creatures dying into mana. They turn creatures dying into these Eldrazi spawns and Eldrazi scions, which you can sacrifice to create mana. Wait a second, you can sacrifice these for free and creating mana? It's just like another form of treasure, except for they're more creatures with synergized together. A couple of these effects on the battlefield, and suddenly a single creature sent to your graveyard will trigger treasure and scions and card draw and +1/+1 counters, and you're just gonna reach this huge cascade of value. You know, there's quite a bit of card draw on our commander, but we're going to want redundancy because there's going to be a target on Korvold's head for sure. With all these land synergies, Tireless Tracker works great, especially because we can sacrifice these clues. Notice this keyword just keeps cropping up. And sending tons of creatures to the graveyard, we can use cards like Grim Harrowspecs to draw cards, Smothering Abomination, both a sacrifice outlet and a reward, and Liliana Dreadhorde General can give us tons and tons of card draw. And also don't discount that each player sacrifices 2 creatures. That can start a pretty good chain of your own creatures creating a lot of value. One thing that I would be a little bit wary of in doing my testing is a card like Midnight Reaper. You might think it belongs in this deck, and it is quite good, but I have taken significant amounts of damage. Like, I've been trying to go off with Korvold, sacrificing Eldrazi spawns and scions and stupid goblins that I created and zombie tokens, and suddenly Midnight Reaper is dealing 10, 15 damage to me as I'm drawing way too many cards. I mean, that is just the right kind of problem to have, isn't it? I have too many cards. Okay, there's other effects that can draw us cards. I really like God Eternal Bontu because it hits the battlefield and then it facilitates that sacrifice. Working with our commander, we can just draw our deck like crazy. Yawgmoth Thran Physician is also really strong, giving us an engine that turns these spawns or scions or other tiny creatures into something really, really powerful. It also could mention that we do have some +1/+1 counter synergies in this, so being able to discard a card to proliferate onto our commander or onto some of our other creatures could be really good. We have a few enchantments and an artifact that helps with the sacrifice theme. Evolutionary Leap can turn small creatures into relevant ones. Birthing Pod kind of has to be built around a little bit, but we can definitely sacrifice creatures as we move up into the chain into more significant spells. And lastly, we have something that's a little bit janky, but I've enjoyed a lot, Aid from the Cowl, a 5-mana enchantment that says at the beginning of your end step, if a permanent you controlled left the battlefield this turn, yeah, you have lots of sacrifice. It will happen. Reveal the top card of your library. If it's a permanent card, you may put it onto the battlefield. Otherwise, you may put it on the bottom of your library. Yeah, you're going to be able to trigger this every single turn. So it's just a pretty fun, slightly janky draw engine. So far, all we've really talked about is mana ramp and card draw, and have you seen how much stuff we're sacrificing? Have you seen how much synergy we have? Now we can start really leaning on our opponent, clearing a path for our creatures. I love Dictate of Erebos because it's just going to keep the whole board clean. You're going to have so many creatures and so many ways to sacrifice at instant speed, your opponents aren't going to be able to keep a creature on the board. It's going to be oppressive. And then we might as well weaponize that with Revel in Riches. Every time one of their creatures dies, you get a treasure, which turns out to be very, very good in this deck. You might just win through treasures and Revel in Riches. There are some other creatures that do really well in this sort of shell. Plague Crafter or other Edict creatures are amazing because everyone's sacrificing and you're getting extra card draw out of it. Shriekmaw or other evoke creatures can be sacrificed if you pay them for evoke cost. That means you're paying 2 mana to kill something and draw a card. Crazy. And then also creatures with sacrifice effects built in. Thrashing Brontoton can be a good beater, but then sacrifice to kill something and then hopefully draw a card. This is reminiscent of some of those other artifacts that you can play, keep on board, and then when your commander's around, suddenly pop everything and really use the sacrifice. And you know, if you're sending a lot of stuff to the graveyard, I like Mayhem Devil. Not only can you point this at your opponent, I like that you can point it at any target, clearing the way of tiny creatures. Just, okay, I'll sacrifice this, bam, 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 kill that thing. That's really, really important. Of course, you can go a little bit bigger and put in cards like Zulaport Cutthroat that can just drain out the table if you happen to assemble that combo. And then Goblin Bombardment 2, Sacrifice Outlet, point the damage exactly where you need it pointed. And then we have Shattergang Brothers. I wanted this to be a good deck, I really did, but as a commander I found it always a little bit slow. Maybe in this deck is where it can really shine, being a super good utility card, addressing exactly what you need to be addressed while drawing cards with your true commander. And then finally, if we want to go big when it comes to sacrifice, let's go big. Death Cloud. So with Death Cloud, you can put tons of mana into X, and then it just decimates the board, except for you've rebuilt. You might have gotten some treasures out of it, some Eldrazi Scions. You might have been drawing cards from Gitrog Monster, sending lands to the graveyard, and you might have drawn a ton of cards, replacing everything that got stripped away from your hand. And guess what? We haven't even truly gotten aggressive yet. One of the best cards for this deck is coming up right now. It's Mazarek Kraul Death Priest, a 5 CMC 2/2 flying insect shaman. Whenever any player sacrifices another permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Oh my gosh. First off, this is an underrated commander. Mazarek can get huge and make armies relevant. This could be the biggest buff for your team that you could ever imagine. Mazarek is going to double up the +1/+1 counters on Korvold too. And this impacts everyone's sacrifice. So a singular Plague Crafter could basically grow your whole team by like +4/+4. Mazarek is amazing in this deck and just a really solid card. It just turns everything into a huge threat. And we're gonna have a ton of different creatures on the battlefield. I already mentioned Sifter of Skulls and Pawn of Ulamog. In fact, those Eldrazi Spawns and Scions could be a theme we have. Let's include Emrakul's Hatcher, From Beyond, and Awakening Zone. All of these can spew out little creatures, and suddenly with huge, overwhelming effects like Mazarek, we can make them relevant. We can also lean a little bit more into Eldrazi. I really like Vile Redeemer. We sacrifice our board away to a Goblin Bombardment or maybe in a board wipe, and then Vile Redeemer comes down and we create a brand new army that we can turn against our opponents. Or we can upgrade our existing army with Emrakul's Evangel. A sacrifice outlet built in, we can change everything into 3/2 Eldrazi horrors and gain tons of value as we go. Again, I like Emrakul's Evangel because it can stay on the battlefield and then give us time to deploy our commander, and then we automatically have card draw. We automatically have protection in this deck. But Devour is what's really going to allow us to go big. Dragon Broodmother. It's a dragon that creates other dragons that devour things as they come in. Devour is a sacrifice mechanic. So you could be creating dragons, putting +1/+1 counters everywhere, drawing cards every single turn. It's just so powerful. Michaeloth also devours stuff and creates Saproling tokens all across the board, again synergizing with +1/+1 counters like that Yawgmoth that I mentioned earlier, and Bloodspore Thrynax, growing your entire team to huge dimensions out of nowhere. Yeah, these are gonna feed on the mass amount of tokens we have, these silly little goblins and Eldrazi spawns, and then suddenly make everything super duper relevant. You know, there's also one other way to close out the game with sacrifice, and that's Bolas's Citadel. A new favorite of mine. Not only can we just start playing cards off the top of our library, just get huge amounts of card advantage, but just imagine this. Tap, sacrifice 10 things, each opponent loses 10 life, you grow your commander by 10 and draw 10 cards, and suddenly you're swinging in with like a 15/15 dragon? Oh my gosh. The sacrifice shenanigans of this deck are honestly endless. Korvold is incredibly explosive. We have so many ways to sacrifice at an instant, but more importantly, we have so many ways to then turn that card draw into actual deployment because we have treasures and scions and Eldrazi spawns. All of these create mana, so we can have these explosive turns where we grow Korvold, create a bunch of mana, draw a bunch of cards, deploy more things, and then suddenly become this unstoppable force because people can't keep us from drawing cards and smashing. I want to thank you so much for watching this amazing commander video from the upcoming set of Throne of Eldraine. If you like this video, consider subscribing because I do all sorts of stuff like this. Also, check out the deck link in the description. That'll take you to tcgplayer.com. And if you buy stuff using my link, it helps me out. So thank you so much for your support. I also have to thank my patrons because they support me constantly. Thank you, patrons. And I'm looking forward to even more commanders out of Throne of Eldraine. I think it's going to be a spectacular set. So make sure to subscribe and hit that bell icon so that you can see all of the new commanders coming out. Bye-bye.